I am biased right off the bat. It should be noted that I'm running the social media channels for Tello Trucks, so I am quite incentivized, I guess, to talk about why I think vehicles as a whole should be smaller, but I think my experience at Tello has helped kind of magnify the issue at hand, and that's why I'm comfortable talking about this on my channel. The Tello guys don't have any control over Tailosive, by the way. They're not asking me to talk about this. I have just decided that I wanted to dive more into it on my own personal brand because I think it's not being talked about enough, and honestly, it's kind of nutty how bad the problem has actually gotten. Like, you go to other countries and you will notice how much smaller vehicles are outside of the United States. And I know there's ego reasons that a lot of American citizens are wanting to buy big old trucks and vans and stuff, but I'm not that surprised when I find out about like aftermarket modders and legacy automakers making big, fat, like ugly SUVs and trucks, but I am kind of surprised to see that a lot of this design characteristic is still being carried over into the electric age. For profitability reasons, look, I get it. I mean, Jim Farley has already said on the record that basically in America, the bigger the truck or the bigger the van, the more profitable it was, and part of that is actually due to the EPA having more and more chill efficiency restrictions based on the size of the vehicle. So our government has literally incentivized a lot of gas vehicle companies to make their vehicles as large as possible so that it's easier and easier for their engines to meet efficiency standards. But of course, that comes at a tremendous cost. There's now multiple sources citing that the larger the hoods are getting on our vehicles, the more and more deadly they're becoming. And it's not merely just a matter of getting sucked under these vehicles when a collision does take place, but also drivers are getting more and more distracted, and the larger the hood, the worse the downward visibility angle is, which basically means if a pedestrian or a small object or a small animal or something gets in front of the vehicle, when you're way off the ground and have all of this mass right in front of you in the vehicle, it becomes harder and harder to literally see what you're actually hitting. And this is something I'm very thankful to be a part of at Tello, because downward visibility angle is actually one of the best ways to address eliminating the pedestrian impact in the first place, because you can see much better of what's in front of you. And thankfully, there's a lot of pedestrian safety going into the design of the Tello truck, which gets me very excited to be a part of that brand, because for one, there's a common misconception I've seen a lot on the social media channels as I've been managing the brand, that the exposed front wheels isn't that going to like suck pedestrians and stuff under the car, but I think the perspective really gets lost on people. What people don't realize is that the Tello truck actually has 16-inch wheels, okay? So not only does that let the truck be a lot more efficient because the wheels are smaller, it's also more cost-effective to replace. Smaller tires tend to be more affordable, but it also means it's far less likely for you to get sucked under the vehicle because of how low it is to the ground. In fact, the exposed wheels on the front are not the primary contact point, even with its better downward visibility angle, making it far less likely for a pedestrian impact to take place anyway. Even if you did have an impact with a Tello truck, the contact point is above the wheels, not the wheels themselves. And because the Tello truck is higher off the ground than a typical sedan, if you were hit by it, you have the least amount of distance to fall onto the windshield, meaning that there's less G-forces being applied, and of course, it's ideal for the pedestrian not to be hit at all, but if they are going to be hit, you want them going over the truck, not under it, because there's far more damage that can happen when they go under, and that's just not really possible with a lot of electric trucks today. Silverado and Denali EVs, I think, are examples of how, okay, you're making it electric, so we want it to be more efficient, but then you make it massive, and you make these trucks huge and very dangerous for pedestrians. And then a lot of people have this misconception I see in the industry all the time that vehicles have these large hoods and they have these big noses that stick out because that's all crumple zone. It's for safety reasons. And if you really look into how vehicle safety testing goes, you'll realize that's not actually necessary to have a successful crumple zone. I mean, just really analyze the hood size on a Model 3 next time you stand by one, and especially if you start watching some of the crash testing videos of the Model 3, or even more accurate than actual crash tests is actual crash footage or aftermath photos of the Model 3 or Y or any EV really in modern history. If you look at how the vehicles impact and collapse after a major head-on collision, you'll notice that the hood does not crumple down to nothing. There's really only a foot or two most of the time that's actually taking the blunt of the impact, and the main reason a lot of vehicles, including Rivians and Lucids and Teslas, keep keep that hood around and keep that additional length of the vehicle is so that it looks a bit more familiar to people, and so you have a bit more frontal storage space, which isn't a bad thing. My wife enjoys the frunk on our Model 3 as well, but I think the market should as a whole pay more attention to the idea that thanks to the electric age allowing us to fit all of our powertrains and all of the battery pack underneath the vehicle, we really didn't need to keep that hood around. It's not serving as big of a functionality as people think, and it could be substantially reduced to improve the downward visibility angle, especially on vehicles like Rivians, which even in the electric pickup truck space, the Rivian is looked at as the smaller truck, like it's not the full-size one, and yet it's actually quite a bit larger than a Toyota Tacoma, which is still substantially larger than the Tello truck, of course, despite the Tello having a larger bed than the Rivian R1T and sitting the same number of people. Like, there's a lot of efficiency advantages that can come from rethinking the vehicle footprint and realizing, okay, how do we make sure it's safe, not just for pedestrians, of course, but also for occupants? There's a bunch of secret sauce stuff I'm not allowed to talk about because I've been working with the Tello truck team, and there's some things they're not ready to show the world yet, but safety for occupants is absolutely a major priority, and that's why they made sure to have 14 inches of unobtrusive crumple zone on the Tello truck. That doubles down on similar to what we see on other vehicles that go through crashes. You have enough room for these big rails that they put in the truck, which the Tello has, to collapse and absorb the majority of the G-forces and impact, along with airbags and optimized brake points to make sure that as the vehicle is collapsing, nothing protrudes and comes inward towards the occupants for maximum safety. And if some people are willing to pay for a truck that's less efficient and larger and harder to navigate and has worse visibility because they just want to have a little bit more storage space in the front, okay, we've got a lot of options that prioritize that, but there should be more options out there on the market for people who say, no, I don't necessarily want a little frontal storage area on my truck. I want a truck that's more efficient, lighter weight, that has better approach angles, so it's better at off-roading, and has better downward visibility so that it prioritizes pedestrian safety. And things I've noticed from watching detailing channels like Out of Spec Detailing is that the more moving body panels you have on vehicles, the harder it is to service them, and the worse the quality control becomes. It's much easier to align panels if they are fixed on the vehicle and they're not constantly moving, but it is a constant battle that we are still seeing on Tesla Cybertrucks because they have a powered frunk. Same thing with Rivian R1Ts. They've got a nice big hood with a deep frunk, but over time, as people are opening and closing that frunk hatch, they get misaligned, and then you're back at the service center again, and you've got to build in a lot of additional plastic and drainage holes whenever you want to build in these frunk spaces, and this adds a lot of additional weight, a lot of complexity, a lot of additional parts and materials into the truck, and I think it's a huge issue that the electric truck space is facing right now, which is that these things are just not affordable for everyday people. And I'm glad to be a part of Tello now because I'm realizing that there's so much outside the box thinking that we don't have to deal with like how the hood is aligned or how the powered frunk gets misaligned after a certain number of uses. I really enjoyed the software and the steer-by-wire of the Cybertruck both times I've gotten the opportunity to drive one, but something I've said and I've seen lots of other channels bring up is this thing is just too dang big. Like, you get in that thing and it's got a 3-foot dashboard and the frunk is not even that big. I mean, it's pretty wide, but how much additional complexity and how much additional parts had to go into this vehicle just so that that windshield could stretch all the way to the front, and now you've got to add a camera to the front so that you can see how close you are, because obviously the downward visibility angle is not that great if you've got 3 foot of dashboard in front of you. But then, oh, what happens if you're off-roading and that front bumper camera gets covered up? Now you got to route washer fluid to that front camera so that you can clean the lens when it gets dirty. All of these things are additional costs and expenses that we're not going to have to worry about with the Tello truck because you can literally just see what's right in front of you thanks to the better downward visibility angle. Essentially, what's the end of the dashboard, which is not 3 feet long, much easier to clean, is about as much clearance as you've got. Like, there's not a lot of distance between the contact point on the front of the Tello truck and the edge of the dashboard because they've optimized the aerodynamic angle so that the windshield comes out a little bit, meaning that thanks to a much smaller frontal area, the Tello will displace way less air than any other electric or gas truck probably on the market these days. They were heavily inspired by K-trucks, which I think are just so much more optimized for storage space and practicality, but the Tello just has a lot more of a safety emphasis than the K-trucks do, of course. But I just feel like this is an underserved market, and I wish Rivian, even, who is known for making the smaller electric truck could double down on figuring out exactly how to make vehicles more lightweight, how to make them more space efficient, and EVs don't necessarily have to weigh substantially more than their gas vehicle counterparts. You know, a Rivian R1T is a bit bigger than a Toyota Tacoma and yet weighs well over 7,000 pounds, and the Cybertruck also is close to 7,000 pounds. These are much, much heavier vehicles, and yet the Tello truck, despite offering similar practicality as a Toyota Tacoma with a 5-foot bed and 5 seats, weighs about the same at 4,400 pounds. And I think it should be mentioned that, like, yeah, while battery packs are typically the most expensive part of an EV, you'll notice that they're rarely more than like 40% of the overall cost. So sometimes cost cutting is not just as simple as, oh, put a smaller battery pack in there. Sometimes it comes down to every tiny little thing stacking up. So by having smaller doors, or by not having a powered hood that has to open and close and have manual hitches, or not having light bars across the rear and the front of the vehicle that most electric trucks have purely for decoration. Those light bars rarely have much functionality in the first place, but they require a lot of additional expense. They require a lot of extra wiring. All of these things that could potentially be skipped and bypassed, and then all of those cost savings in the manufacturing side are then passed on to the consumer, and you get a more efficient product in the end. You get a lighter weight product that is not wearing out tires as drastically as all of these other electric trucks are. And the crazy thing about people getting all fussy about safety with smaller, more compact vehicles is that most vehicles with big hoods on the roads, they don't really have that great crumple zones, because engines, for one, don't collapse all that much in a collision. Everyone thinks that there's just this giant airbag in front of them on the road, and that's not the case. In fact, even with electric vehicles like the Cybertruck, you'll see the ones that are in head-on collisions. That's not pure crumple. Like, there's not all of this dashboard space that's absorbing the blow. No, they really only need like a 1.5 feet in order to absorb the impact of this 7,000-pound steel beast driving down the road. And what people aren't realizing is that if you make the vehicle lighter weight, it actually requires less crumple zone to slow down the impact, because there's less overall inertia to absorb within those shock rails in the front. So the smaller the vehicle, the safer it can actually get, the less inertia you have to absorb in a head-on collision. And despite all of that, we've got like tens of thousands of Cybertrucks on the road. And by the way, none of them have actually officially been crash certified by third parties. Tesla has done their own in-house crash testing, but they haven't shared the findings from them. We assume, because it's Tesla, that it has pretty good passive and active safety systems. I am pretty confident it's a safe vehicle, but my point is, because it's so heavy, it didn't have to abide by the same kind of crash testing regulations that sedans and smaller vehicles have to abide by. That's from a lot of lobbying power from the big SUV and big pickup truck manufacturers out there. They have lobbied the federal government so that if the vehicle is over a certain weight or over a certain size, it doesn't have to be crash tested to be sold in the US. That's why there's no official crash rating on the Cybertruck yet, and yet there's tens of thousands of them on the road. And I don't think they're that dangerous, honestly, but still, there's far more dangerous vehicles out there that also did not have to be crash tested, and yet so many customers are perfectly fine buying them and driving them because they just think, oh, they have a big hood and they're high off the ground, which means they're safe. In actuality, for like every one occupant you save by making the vehicle larger, you're on average killing probably like 10 more pedestrians by increasing the hood size. So I don't really see that as a safer vehicle at the end of the day. I think there is a more revolutionary way to design vehicles to make them safe for occupants and pedestrians, while at the same time making them more cost-effective for everybody. So again, this video is not sponsored, but it is heavily biased because I am working with the Tello Truck team. But I just wanted you guys to know that even if they fired me for whatever reason, or I was not working at Tello, I would be following them very, very closely, because I do think that they're paving the way for the future of EV design, and I want one myself. Like, if I was in the market for a pickup truck, I'm the kind of guy that would want the smallest, most efficient one possible that is still safe, both for me and the occupants in the vehicle, and also for pedestrians. Like, I've driven big trucks in the past, okay? I've driven the F-150 Lightning, and before I was even making EV YouTube videos, I drove an F-350 for many years for an old job at a mandarin ranch, and I don't like driving those big tanks. The visibility is terrible, parking is terrible, and that's what I've fallen in love with the most with my Model 3, is just the incredible dimensions. There's actually so much storage space in my Model 3 that I can fit just by folding the second row down, and yet it's still very efficient, and I can easily fit in all kinds of different parking spaces. And it's still mind-blowing to me that even though I'm genuinely impressed by my Model 3, I still think the Model 3 is the best car on the market right now, and yet the Tello truck is nearly 3 feet shorter cheaper than my Model 3, and personally, no, I don't believe it's at any compromise of safety, because there's shock absorbers in the Tello truck to slow down that vehicle in a head-on collision and prioritize the occupant's safety, and I just get way more practicality out of that Tello truck, and it's going to be substantially cheaper than any other electric truck on the market. So that's why I'm excited for the company I'm working for. Of course, I'll link them in the description below if you want to follow them more closely. I'm running all the social media stuff over there, and we've got lots of projects in the works that I'm excited to share with you all. And this is a rare occasion for me to talk about them on the channel, but there's just certain things that I feel like as a brand we probably can't say as aggressively that I wanted to say for my own personal sake, that the crash industry and the belief around vehicle safety has been totally skewed in the US. Like, so much have been brainwashed, and that's not being talked about enough. So feel free to check them out in the description and place a refundable deposit if you're interested. The money is fully refundable, and Tello does not have access to the funds. It's held in an escrow account, and the line is growing. So if you're even remotely interested in having a Tello truck within the next 3 years, I would highly recommend placing a deposit soon, because the wait is just going to keep getting longer. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.